Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from ItalianGenealogy.blog. Today I'll be speaking with Jennifer Petrino from Sicilian Family Tree. Good morning, Jennifer. How's everything?
Good morning. Everything is good here from Georgia.
Great, great. Glad to hear that. So, my first question is going to be when and why did you start researching your family?
So, I started researching my family back in 1999. My husband and I had moved from South Florida to Pensacola, and after I got my house in order, I had nothing left to do. And so I started researching out of curiosity. I called my grandmother, asked her some questions, and started poking around on the internet, which, back then was fairly new. Um, and just kind of really got hooked. And I think the spark for me, though, was before we moved. We used to live in Miami, and I, grew up down there. And I went with my aunt just before Christmas to an Italian market that was in North Miami Beach called Lorenzo's Italian Market. And I had never been there before, although my family had shopped there for years. But I had never gone, and I went this one time with my aunt. And it, when I walked into that place, I was so overwhelmed with just the sights and the smells and everything in there. There was a guy playing an accordion and, salami hanging from the ceiling and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of really sparked my interest. So after we moved, when I found myself with time, I started researching.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Yeah, I guess, my story is a little bit different because I grew up with the salami in the bakery right up the block from my grandmother's. So,
Yeah, that must have been great. I was born in New York, but my family moved to South Florida when I was little, like 4 years old. And so, even though there's lots of Italians down there, there are not, bakeries and and delis, right next door kind of a thing. So I didn't get to experience that. And I didn't typically, even though my grandparents came from large families, I did not have, the big Sunday giant, Italian family dinners with everybody there. It just, no, not everybody didn't live in Miami with us. So I didn't get to experience all of that.
right. And with my family, we grew up with all of that, but, it's been lost now. It's as the grandparents died and then my mom died and all of that. So that all unfortunately disappeared.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to help others find their families?
So when I started researching, I was enjoying it so much. I really, really, really loved it and would sit at work on it all day long. After being in Pensacola for a couple of years, I was pregnant with our daughter, whose name is Francesca, and thought I loved it so much, but I wanted to be able to stay at home with her and still have some sort of an income. And so I had posted, I belonged at that time, there was a Roots Web mailing list that I belonged to for people of Italian heritage. And I posted a question on there basically saying, hey, I'm pregnant. I want to stay at home with my daughter when she's born. And I was thinking of maybe researching for others, does anybody do this or what do y'all think of this? And I had somebody message me back and say, I'd pay you to do my stuff for me. And I was like, really? Um, and so she was my very first client. And believe it or not, even after all of these years, I still research for her. And her son-in-law now also. So that's really was what started it was the desire to be able to stay at home with my daughter but still have some sort of an income, but also doing something that I really really loved to do, and I'm so blessed to have kind of stumbled into this career that I love, doing what I love. They always say, figure out what you love and do what you love and figure out a way to make money doing it. And somehow I've managed to do that. So I'm very blessed.
That's great. And for people who are listening, what kind of services do you provide for them?
So I research families of Italian or Sicilian origin. I have roughly 30 clients at any given time. Some of them, everybody's looking for something different, different but similar, I guess you might say. I have some clients that want to research their families back as far as we can possibly go. So we do that. I have some that want to, maybe they're going on a trip to Italy soon, or they want to find living relatives either here or still in Italy or Sicily. So we research forward that way. I have some that have specific goals in mind, like for example, I want to find this particular branch of the tree and know what happened to them. So I provide whatever type of research the client is interested in. Whatever their goal is, that's what we work towards. I used to do dual citizenship assistance as well. I've kind of scaled that back because, very honestly, I don't enjoy it quite as much as I do the full on, researching back as far as we can go type of work. So I don't do that so much anymore, but it is something I have experience in as well.
When you say you go back as far as you could find, most of us, like myself, we use the Antonati, of course.
Hmm.
And I had a couple of roadblocks, and I hired somebody over in Italy to help me find a couple of things. But a lot of people ask, or on my blog or on the Facebook group, a lot of people ask about finding the records that aren't on the Antonati. For example, church records, prior to 1800. So do you help with that?
Yes. So there's also Family Search, which is where the records on the Italian State Archives website are coming from. So Family Search is an extension of the Mormon Church, which some people may know. They have originally microfilmed records from all over the world, and they have now been digitized and put on Family Search, and in the case of Italy, also on the Italian State Archives website. So Family Search for some towns also has church records, and some of them go back to the 1500s. So you can access those. Most of the church records can be accessed from home on Family Search. So I can use those church records to get back further. They also have on Family Search, they call them census records, but really they're more like a tax record. And they go back also to roughly, they can be anywhere from the 1600s to the 1700s. They were done very sporadically. Um, they're all handwritten, a little challenging to use, but generally they will include the head of a family with all of the people that live in the household, sometimes with ages, mostly for just the males, and then a listing of everything that the family had, whether it be property or property like as in land, or uh, this many donkeys or this many horses or this many vineyard, in a vineyard, how many grapes they have and what variety they are, and debts owed to them and debts that they owe. So it can be very interesting to research, and those go back into the 1700s depending on the town. Very sporadically done, so it's not like you can check back every 5 years and watch a family grow. Sometimes there's 25 years between record sets. So there's a lot available on Family Search that's not on the Italian State Archives website, that can help you get back further in your research.
Yeah, and I've used that myself, and I did find a few things out there. My dad's mom actually comes from two noble families in Naples. So her father was Piramalo, and her what would be my third great grandfather. He was the Duke of Montebello
Mm,
in Calabria, and his wife was the Duchess of Capricotta
hmm.
in Molise. And then, but her mother was actually Caracciolo, and I have them back to 950,
Wow.
and they're a very, very famous noble family from Naples. And besides that family, I've gotten them back to all the kings and queens of Europe for the most part.
Wow.
It's been quite amazing.
I bet.
But we were supposed to be there in 2 weeks, and we were supposed to go to my third great grandmother's home and my third great
Oh,
grandfather's home because they're still there. And my ninth great grandfather was Prince Marino Caracciolo, and he was the Prince of Avellino and the Duke of Altrapaldo and the Countess Sanseverino and all
wow.
of this stuff. And like I said, we were supposed to be there in 2 weeks, and I was going to meet cousins that I never knew existed, third and
Oh,
fourth
wonderful.
cousins. We were going to have a lunch and all of this kind of stuff. So hopefully this thing's going to blow over by the fall and we'll be able to go.
Yes, I hope so. That sounds like it would be an amazing, amazing trip.
Yeah, but to your point, searching some of the records that I did found going back to the 1800s, early 1800s, some of my grandmother's family is listed as rich person.
Mm-hmm.
Another one was property owner.
Yes.
So that was quite interesting to find. And I did find that they all lived on one street in Naples, Via Carbonara. And the trip we took to Italy 20-something years ago, we were at the train station. I had no idea of any of this. And all of these homes were half a mile from the train station.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow.
but, you know, I told my wife, I said, I have to go on the cemetery search with my cousin at least for half a day when we're there. So if you don't want to go to the cemetery, you can find something to do.
We went to the cemetery when we went to my native town in Sicily. It was a fascinating, I mean, I happen to like cemeteries. I know that's a little weird maybe, but I enjoy going to cemeteries and just looking. It's history right there in front of you. And the cemetery in my native town in Sicily was very interesting, small. And, you know, that's where I learned that in the smaller towns, and I don't know, perhaps in some of the bigger ones, when they start to run out of space, they remove the remains of everybody out of the grave sites, put them all into a mass tomb, and then reuse the grave sites again. Every 25 or so, 30 years is what I was told. I never knew that before I went there, so it's an interesting place to visit.
Yeah, I believe they actually do some of that in New York City, but it's 100 years, I think it is.
Oh, wow.
So some of the Catholic cemeteries, I think, do it.
I didn't
But
know that.
they're, because there's no room
Yeah, yeah. There's
any
only
longer.
so much space. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What town in Sicily?
So my family is on my mom's mother's side is from a little town in Palermo province called Missilneri. And on my father's side, my paternal grandfather there is from Bagheria, also in Palermo province. And then on my mom's side, I also have from Sciacca in Agrigento. So, um, and then my dad's mother's side is from Ventimiglia di Sicilia, also in Palermo. So mostly I'm a Palermo Sicilian of heritage from Palermo area.
Well, that's funny because my wife's grandfather is from Sciacca.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
We were going to go there too.
Oh,
We were going to, spend the day in Palermo and take us down. And the interesting thing about our trip, I found somebody who actually does, she calls it Italy rooting,
Hmm.
So it's not just like a regular tour. They actually do a deep dive into your family.
Oh, wonderful.
And she didn't tell me everything that was going on. I knew a little bit, like the lunch with my cousins and things, but they actually try to make you feel like you're back 200 years ago or something like that.
Wow.
So,
That sounds very
um,
interesting. I'll have to look that up. Years ago, when I very first started researching, and I was part of that Roots Web uh, mailing list I mentioned, I responded to a post there, and it somehow very blessed to end up as part of this Ellis Island Immigration Family History Center project. And that is how I was able to go to Miss Mary when I very first started researching and meet my family there. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to do. So I always love when my clients are going to their native town. I try to find, the addresses where their family members lived and anything we can to, help their family come alive for them while they're there.
We'll be right back.
experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with PhilItaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. Yeah, and like I said, my dad's family's from Naples, and his father's family, they were not noble, but they were pretty well off. My mom's family comes from Bari, and they were, farmers and seamstresses. The men were farmers, and the women were farmers or seamstress.
Mm-hmm.
And my oldest uncle, when my grandparents came, he stayed behind with his grandparents.
Hmm.
And the story goes that my grandparents came because my grandmother didn't want my grandfather going back into the army during World War One, and they were going to come back or to go back. They were going to go back to Italy,
Hmm.
and then they started having more kids. They wound up with 9 over here, and then my uncle became 18 and he couldn't come.
Hmm.
He had to go in the army.
Right.
Then he started a family. So my cousins from my oldest uncle were all born in Italy,
Hmm.
and they only came over in 1950.
Oh, wow. Much more recent.
Yeah, and they lived in the house that my great grandparents and maybe my great great grandparents lived, two-room house, and I did interview a couple of my cousins that lived there. But the amazing thing was about a year ago, the youngest cousin from my uncle, he told me, well, I interviewed my father in Barres. He said, and I wanted to translate it a couple of times and I got choked up and I couldn't do it. I said, Joey, you have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to put this in English so we could all see it and hear it and understand it. And he did with his sister. And it was a great story about my uncle growing up in Italy in the, early 1900s, 1920s, and
Hmm.
how his life was like.
Interesting.
So, what was the most amazing discovery that you found, either for your family or for a client?
Oh gosh. Well, it's hard to, it's hard to pinpoint just one thing. I've had a lot of fun recently with DNA. I have several clients who have done DNA research, DNA tests, and then want to figure out how they're related to everybody in their results. But I do have a couple of clients who approached me that they had mysteries in their family. Um, that they didn't know who their grandfather was or the great grandfather, and we've used DNA to unravel those mysteries. And some of that has been really, really fun to work on. I also used DNA. My father in law is adopted. And so he and my husband both did a DNA test, and we unraveled that information to discover who his birth family was, and that's been really interesting too. I also I had one client at one time who kind of similar to you had nobility in his family, or he had told me that he did and wanted to research this, that the family had been knighted and they had a coat of arms and stuff like that. And for all of the years I've been researching, I have a lot of clients that say that, but then it turns out that it wasn't actually true. But in this case, it was true. And once we got back as far as the records could go, we did hire somebody in Italy to go to the state archives in person and go through documents. And we found like the original papers from when his family members became knighted. And there were letters from, oh gosh, I want to say it was a princess of Austria, if I remember correctly, who wrote a letter of recommendation basically saying that these men should be knighted. That was, that was pretty awesome. Um, there's so many interesting things. I love, I just love researching anything, whether it's going to be amazing or not. I love solving the mystery and putting the pieces of the puzzle where they all go. So really everything to me is, exciting when I find something, that I was looking for. It's all amazing in its own way, especially to my clients. It's one thing, it's always fun to research your own family. But for me, even researching for other people and making these discoveries for them and then getting to share it with them, what I found is really, really fun. I just love it. I love every bit of it. So there's been lots of amazing things discovered. But I think to your question, I think some of the recent things I have found using DNA have been really, really amazing. DNA is certainly changing a lot of the way research works. Um, One of the recent ones I was working on, this client came to me. His uh, great grandfather was unknown. He knew who the great grandmother was, but the great grandfather was unknown. And so we went through the DNA results. And to make a long story short, I found that there was a gentleman who had been married several times, had children with each wife, as well as other people, and all of a descendant from each of them had done a DNA test. So they were all linked to each other, but with different names because, one part of that family had Americanized their names. It was such a web of information to put together. And in one instance, there was one of the DNA matches had a tree, but none of it made any sense whatsoever. There was nobody Italian in the tree anywhere, and I couldn't figure out, how are these people related to him via DNA? They're connected somehow, but their tree does not reflect it. And so I started researching their tree just to try to figure it out and ended up stumbling upon a naturalization record for one of the people they had in their tree. And when I was looking over the naturalization record, this mystery man, great grandfather of my client, turned out to be the next door neighbor of this person's ancestor. And so you can kind of extrapolate what may have happened there, how they ended up DNA connected. So, there's always interesting things turning up when you use DNA too.
Yeah, and to your point, I think those of us who are hooked on this, it's that mystery and following the clues and then finding
Yes.
some amazing thing.
Yes.
When I started it, and I always knew this from a little kid. My grandmother had brought my grandfather's, I call it a calling card, but his name was Nicola Piramalo, and there was a coat of arms on it, and it said, from the Dukes of Capricato. So that was my starting point. And I always thought I was going to find this amazing thing with him. And it was amazing for sure, as I traced him back very, very far. But then when I came across the I found it on Angel Fire, the records from the Caracciolo family, and I saw that he married an Amelia Caracciolo. And it made sense because my oldest aunt was, her name was Emily.
Mm,
My father was Nicholas, named after him. So, from the naming standards, it all made sense. But I wasn't sure. So I called my cousin who lived with my grandmother, and I said, "Do you recognize this name?" And she says, "Of course, that's Nanny's mother. That's her name, and
mm,
there's saints, and there was an admiral in the family, and she used to tell us stories about that all the time."
yeah.
But
It's
never in my
amazing.
wildest dreams did I ever think that I was going to be able to trace my great-grandmother back to these most amazing people.
Yeah, that is pretty fascinating. Yeah. I think that it's so interesting to me too how much our family members know that they don't actually ever really tell us. Even my own grandmother, I remember when I was first researching, I'd asked her all kinds of questions and, written down everything she told me. And then I started using the records to, search more. And I found my grandmother's mother's name was Catherine or Katerina. And she was born, I want to say, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but I want to say it was like 1876. And as I was researching through the records, I found that her parents had another child in like 1896 named Katerina also, which is unusual. When one child survived, they didn't usually reuse the name. And so I called my grandmother and I said, Grandma, I found this record and it looks like your mother had a younger sister who had the same name. And she said, Oh, yeah, she did. And I said, Well, why didn't you tell me that? And she said, Well, you didn't ask me. And I was like, How was I supposed to know to ask you that? Um, so there's a lot of information that our family members know, but you have to know the right questions to ask. And sometimes you don't know those until you start researching, and then something triggers you to ask the right question
Well,
to
yeah,
uncover a
exactly.
mystery.
And that's what happened. Well, with both my grandmothers. I mean, I was when my mother's family died, I was maybe in my late teens, early 20s when those grandparents died, and my father, my father's mother, I was only about, I don't know, 11 or 12 when she passed away. So I never really knew or understood, or I never really even asked my father about it, and he probably wouldn't have known that much anyway.
Hmm.
So it was quite amazing. That the two things about my my grandmother's father is, I call them birth cards. I don't know if that's the proper terminology, but he has two records, or two of these cards that I have copies of, and he's got two different mothers.
Say again now?
He's
Like
got two
from the
different.
Italian records or from.
Yeah, yeah. One says Maria Leone, and the other one says Maria Savino.
Huh.
And nobody can figure this out. But then when you actually see the full record, it shows in there that, and I forget the exact term, but it shows that he was, I think, illegitimate.
Oh, okay.
So grandfather is Piramalo. One of these two women is his mother, and I don't know, because I have records of his siblings, and they all show Maria Savino. So I don't know if this Maria Leone, if possibly it's the same person, and they changed it later on and corrected, and there was just some sort of error in there.
Yeah.
But actually, in the record itself, and again, I forget the Italian terminology, but it kind of means that he was illegitimate. That his,
Interesting.
so still haven't solved
Yeah.
that mystery as to why.
As to why those kinds of records where there's a foundling child. A lot of us have those in our family history where the birth record is sort of along the lines of this child was found in the receiving wheel on such and such day with these little trinkets with him or her. Those dead ends can be really, really hard to solve, although DNA is also producing some interesting results there. But there's also there's that time period shortly after unification, when all of that kind of commotion was happening, that there were a lot of people who had children who got married in the church, but not in the civil vital records office, because of course before unification you weren't considered married unless you got married at the church. So that's why all of those records from like 1820 to 1865 have both the civil record side and they include the church information. And then after that, there was a separation of church and state, basically. And so, um, but I think a lot of people they weren't sure if that was all going to last. So they would still only go get married in the church. But then when they were reporting the births of their children, they were technically, according to the government, not legally married. So the birth records of their children might only show the father or the mother, or it might say as a result of a natural union with someone he's not married to, you know. And then sometimes later on, when I guess they realized that this new Italian government was going to stick around, they would go and get married again in the Civil Vital Records Office and legitimize their children right on the marriage record.
Yeah, so
Those are always interesting to find.
yeah, maybe something like that happened. I'll have to send you that page so you can take
Yeah,
a look at
I'd
it.
be curious to see it, especially how there are two,
Yeah,
two records with identical information,
yeah,
except for her name. Yeah.
it's very, very strange. And the other interesting thing that I found out is that he has the same birthday as my father.
Oh, nice.
So, grandfather and grandson have the same birthdays.
Nice.
So that was strange too. But this has been fabulous. I always love talking about this stuff. I could tell you do too.
Yes,
I think
I
we
do.
all have that same sickness.
It is definitely a condition.
Well, thanks again, and
Thank you for
we'll
having
keep
me.
in touch and stay safe. I hope the family stays safe.
Yes, thank you. You guys as well. Everybody stay home and keep your social distance so we can all get this over with sooner rather than later.
Yes, let's pray. All right,
Yes.
thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook in the Italian Genealogy Group or at www.italiangenealogy.blog.